His very first job paid just $12 a week, which was such a tiny amount it was almost invisible in American society at that time. Yet decades later that same man would build a fortune of around $70 million live on a massive ranch that had its own bottling plant on it, and keep a garage full of cars that would make even very wealthy people stop and stare. There were properties he kept hidden away, and investments that almost nobody knew anything about, and a $10 million offer he once turned down flat, as if money had never really been the thing that defined who he was. But even all of that is still not the most jaw-dropping part of Chuck Norris's life. 9 days before he passed away, he appeared in a video filmed in Hawaii, still throwing sharp, crisp punches, still smiling, and writing the words, "I don't age, I level up." The whole world believed it because for decades Chuck Norris was not just a man. He was a symbol of being unbeatable, a walking definition of strength, and a living legend that the internet had turned into something almost mythical. But on March 19, 2026, a short statement from his family brought everything to a complete stop. No explanation given, no medical details shared, just one simple truth. The man who seemed impossible to defeat was gone. So what truly made Chuck Norris who he was? How did a boy who grew up in poverty inside a broken family, carrying deep insecurities and mistakes that could never be erased, become a legend? And behind that image of being undefeatable, what was the real price he had to pay? Chuck Norris passed away in Hawaii following a sudden medical incident. There was no detailed medical record left behind, and no clear explanation offered to the public, only a silence that spread faster than any breaking news story could. His passing did not look anything like what the public had always imagined it would be. There were no signs of a slow decline, no prepared farewell, no long goodbye, just a clean and sharp cut through the image of invincibility that had existed for so many decades. It was exactly that silence that made the media's reaction so unusual. Major news outlets reported the story in a very restrained tone, almost completely avoiding any speculation, as if they were describing something that went beyond ordinary logic and understanding. And then voices began appearing everywhere, not to explain the death, but to try to describe the real man behind the legend. Donald Trump wrote Chuck Norris was a great guy and a great supporter. Tough cookie. It was a short statement, but it spread instantly because it captured exactly what the public had always believed about him. A man so tough he seemed like he could never truly be broken. Texas Governor Greg Abbott did not talk about Hollywood at all, but spoke instead about what Chuck Norris symbolized. Texas has lost a legend, he said, which was a confirmation that Norris did not belong only to movies, but to an entire cultural identity tied to the world of action. Those who had once stood alongside him at the very peak of that world chose words that were striking in how simple they were. Sylvester Stallone looked directly at the heart of that image and said he was the real deal. A true all-American action hero. Not acting and not a created persona, but genuinely the real deal. That was a rare acknowledgement from someone who understood better than almost anyone else what it truly costs to become a symbol like that. Jean-Claude Van Damme brought him closer to the human side by saying he was not only strong on screen, but a kind and disciplined man in real everyday life. The contrast between the words strong and kind made that line get repeated over and over again because it broke the one-sided image that the public was so used to seeing. Dolph Lundgren went even a step further by saying, "I am not just talking about the man, but about the standard." Chuck Norris set the standard for toughness and integrity in action films. He was a man who did not just play the game but completely redefined what the game was. And then among all those powerful and symbolic tributes, one statement appeared in a much quieter way yet stayed with people the longest. Stephen King did not call him a legend. He did not say anything about strength. He simply wrote "Silent rage scared me." No analysis, no explanation, just a memory. But that one memory made people suddenly realize that Chuck Norris was not only remembered for what he did on screen, but for the feeling he left behind inside people. Those from a younger generation like John Hurwitz saw him as a foundation and called him a martial arts legend. Meanwhile, Mario Lopez unintentionally touched on the deepest contradiction of all when he said he was one of the toughest men who ever lived, but also one of the kindest. The toughest yet also the kindest. Two qualities that seem impossible to exist in the same person, yet together they defined exactly who Chuck Norris really was. And then all of those layers started falling away when his family spoke publicly. No more legend, no more icon, no more talk of toughness. Just a father. Their words did not try to shape any kind of image and did not look for understanding from the public. Just memories. And at that moment the whole story shifted because in the end Chuck Norris's death did not make the world realize how strong he was. It made people realize he was never someone who simply could not be defeated. He was simply someone who had stood firm for so long that the entire world had forgotten that he too could fall. Chuck Norris's death did not just close the chapter on a screen legend. It also forced people to look again at another side of his life and ask how a boy who grew up in real deprivation managed to build a lasting and solid financial empire. At the time of his passing, his net worth was estimated at around $70 million. Compared to the megastars of the streaming era, that number might not seem particularly shocking. But what makes it genuinely remarkable is where he started from. Chuck Norris did not inherit any wealth, did not have a powerful family behind him to give him a running start, and did not walk into Hollywood carrying million-dollar contracts. Everything he eventually owned was built in a way that closely mirrored who he actually was as a person. Slow, steady, intentional, and almost never dependent on any single lucky opportunity. The first foundation of that wealth came from the movies. In the late 1970s and all through the 1980s, films carrying Chuck Norris's name brought him more than $500 million worldwide. He was not the kind of actor who immediately received massive percentages of box office revenue the way many modern stars do. His income grew step by step with each project, moving from early leading roles that were still being met with doubt all the way to becoming a true bona fide action star. That way of making money perfectly reflected his whole career path. No sudden overnight explosion that changed everything at once, but a slow and steady building up of position and then turning that position into real commercial value. If film was the foundation, then Walker Texas Ranger was the structure that made Chuck Norris's wealth more stable and built up with more layers. The series not only placed him among the most familiar television faces in all of America, but also created a very large and long-lasting stream of income. With a salary of about $375,000 per episode, his direct earnings from the show alone went over $30 million. But the money he earned up front was not even the most important part of the whole picture. What truly made the real difference was the show's long-term value. Walker Texas Ranger brought in approximately $692 million through Reruns' international distribution licensing and other forms of use over the years. Chuck Norris's role in that project went well beyond just being an actor. He also participated as a producer, which gave him access to long-term profits that many actors of his generation completely missed out on by just taking a short-term paycheck and walking away. His income did not stop at the screen either. After becoming a major name, Chuck Norris expanded his influence into publishing and wrote books about martial arts, politics, and his Christian faith, reaching a completely different audience from his movie fans. This was not just extra income, but a way of extending his personal brand beyond the action star label and into the role of someone sharing real-life perspectives, moral values, and personal beliefs with the world. Alongside books came advertising, which was a quieter but very steady source of income. He promoted Action Jeans, a product that became almost symbolic because it lined up so perfectly with his martial arts image. Later came deals with T-Mobile, World of Warcraft, and even a bank in Poland. These deals were not flashy big-money celebrity endorsements, but they showed clearly that Chuck Norris's name could be turned into real commercial value across many different markets and audiences. Alongside film, television, books, and advertising, there was a quieter but very revealing part of how he built his wealth, which was through business and systems. Starting from a single martial arts school, Chuck Norris expanded into a chain of more than 30 locations spread across California. This matters because it shows he did not only make money by showing up and performing, but by creating a model that could operate, expand, and keep itself going over time. He later founded the United Fighting Arts Federation, a structure that did not only serve martial arts training, but also standardized the whole system, issued certifications, and maintained a long-term network of real influence. This was the move of someone who understood that personal fame would eventually change, but a properly built organization could outlast the peak years of the person who created it. From that foundation, Chuck Norris kept expanding his brand into areas that were closely tied to his personal lifestyle. He developed bottled water sourced directly from his own ranch and expanded into dietary supplements and even pet food. These products were not launched as short-term celebrity projects. They were tightly connected to the image Chuck Norris had built over decades. Discipline, health, self-reliance, and living by strong principles. That consistency kept these business branches from ever feeling like they were disconnected from who he really was. They became natural extensions of everything the Norris name stood for. Real estate formed yet another layer in that financial picture. His home in Dallas, connected to the Walker Texas Ranger era, was sold for about $1.2 million. But that property was more than just a dollar amount. It was tied to the period when Chuck Norris was a national television icon. Still, the true center of his wealth and lifestyle was his Texas ranch, a large property used not just for living but for bringing together multiple production and lifestyle functions all in one place. There was a bottling plant, training areas, a private lake, livestock, and plenty of operational space, along with a very clear sense of complete self-sufficiency. Beyond Texas, he also owned a property in Hawaii valued at around $7 million, where he spent much of his later years in life. If Dallas represented his television success, then Texas and Hawaii together reflected that his assets were not just investments but real expressions of very specific choices about how he wanted to live. And from here, Chuck Norris's wealthy lifestyle becomes much clearer. Not in the familiar Hollywood sense of the word, but in an entirely different rhythm and style. The center of his life was not in some luxury neighborhood designed for maximum media visibility, but at Lone Wolf Ranch out in Texas. This was not just a place to live. It was an operating hub where many different aspects of his life and his assets all came together in one place. The property included a 50,000-square-foot bottling plant, martial arts facilities, a private lake, and enough space to support both living and production happening at the same time. Its whole character was closer to a self-sustaining compound than to a typical celebrity mansion. That environment reflected his personal philosophy in a very precise way. Discipline, autonomy, independence, and absolutely no need to show off in order to feel like he had real worth. From that ranch, his bottled water brand was built using water sourced from an underground aquifer that was marketed as pure, alkaline, and sustainable. What stands out here is not just the promotional details but the bigger context. This was not a product where a celebrity simply slapped his name on it and let a whole team handle everything else. It came directly from where he lived, from resources he personally owned, and from the healthy lifestyle image he had consistently projected for decades. That made the brand far more naturally connected to his actual life than most celebrity business ventures ever managed to be. Following the same kind of thinking, his pet food brand also grew out of real needs inside his own household. Instead of following mass industrial processing methods, his product direction put the emphasis on real nutrition, minimal processing, and a closer alignment with natural feeding. This is not a small detail. It shows how Chuck Norris extended his personal value system into the everyday parts of life. Not just caring about his own health, but thinking deeply about how he lived and how he took care of everything closest to him. It turned his wealth into something more than just money and assets. It became an entire ecosystem tied to what he believed in. Even his car collection followed the same logic of careful selection rather than pure showing off. The Dodge Charger SRT Hellcat spoke clearly in the language of raw power. Loud, muscular, and completely unapologetic about what it was. The Ford Mustang Boss 429 represented something rare and deeply iconic in American muscle car culture. The Toyota Land Cruiser served very practical everyday needs, especially for navigating ranch terrain and living a life that was not entirely urban. The Rolls